Hello Internet, it's Drew. Welcome back to the dungeon. This is the second of the three pillars or the three true pillars of good D&D, at least according to me. Epic scope. It's an easy thing to say, but what does it actually mean? So what is a scope? I'm probably misusing established narrative terms here or established story writing terms, but for the purposes of these three videos, scope is the backdrop of your campaign. If the storyline of your campaign is the painting, then the scope is the canvas that it is painted upon, right? It's the limits of everything that happens in your game. If the scope is the limits, then the story is how you get to those limits, and the tone is how you feel about the journey. Right? That's what I'm thinking when I'm describing these terms. These three pillars as well, the heroic tone, the epic scope, and the narrative progression, all reinforce each other. So by that I mean that if you have a very epic scope, then it's much easier to construct a heroic tone out of it, because the kind of situations the PCs are going to find themselves in and the sort of things that they survive and the interactions they have with the world are going to be amazing. And it's much easier for someone to feel like a hero if they're like flying on dragonback across an ocean in search of an ancient artifact, rather than resolving a feud between the baker and the mayor in a small village. An epic scope will also reinforce the narrative progression, because that gives plenty of room for your story to expand into the scope and fill it, for your players' character arcs to resolve, for all of this sort of richness to emerge, because you have basically given a very open field and said that everything is on the table. Now that definitions are out of the way, I think probably the best way to kind of like start talking about this more is to give an example. So to do that, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite games of all time from the 16-bit days on the Super Nintendo, Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy IV is just a fearlessly ambitious little 16-bit role-playing game. It's 2D. It looks quite humble compared to some of the things that we have available now. But still, in terms of scope, this game is amazing because it starts with a disagreement between you. You play a soldier and your king in a castle. It's limited to that situation, that drama. You get banished, you get sent, exiled off to another realm. You go there, you start to uncover a conspiracy, and the scope is gradually zooming more and more out to accommodate the progressing narrative, right? So now, before it was just about the castle and your relationship with the king. Now it's about several kingdoms and their relationship with your kingdom. And then it keeps going and going. Eventually you get hold of a chocobo for transport, and then you have an airship, and suddenly the whole world is at play and you're traversing the entire thing, but the scope still isn't finished because you discover that there's an underworld. You fly your airship down a volcano and you end up in an underworld. So there's a whole second world underneath the first one. And this continues on and on until the players eventually raise a spaceship from the depths of the ocean and fly it out into space, up to the moon, where they fight a demigod type evil creature that's intending to wipe all life from the planet. Look at how ambitious this game is. Look at everything it does. And I can't help but be inspired. And logically, then the question as the dungeon master that I find myself asking is, why can't you go to the moon of your world? What does that look like? Who's to say you can't fly an airship down a volcano? Of course you can. This is D&D. We can do whatever we want. It's really important to look at things like this. It's stealing stuff from other things. Everyone says steal, steal, steal. But I think the most important thing to steal is the permission to remove your restraint, right? Like the permission to be imaginative, to understand that D&D doesn't have to be about fighting goblins in a forest, fighting rats in a basement, just swapping the monsters out and swapping the terrain out and rolling a bunch of dice, and then, yeah, you got a +1 sword, whatever. You have permission to do whatever you want, okay? And you can look at things like this, games, novels, whatever. In my world, there's a temple to Pelor, the god of sun and the summer. There is a temple to Pelor on the surface of the sun. Now, that's insane, right? But we're talking about a world where gods exist, where magic exists, where all the limits don't apply. So if you were the god of the sun, where would your temple be? It wouldn't be on some planet. It would be on the sun. I think that's a really important thing for you to look at these other worlds and works that captivate you. For me, when I was starting DMing, I was reading a lot of the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson, and he has a foreword in his book, which states specifically how uncompromising he wants to be with the level of complexity and the ambition of his work. And I really admire that, right? Like I'm not going to say they're an easy read, or at least they weren't for me, but they are amazing books that are super high powered right from the get-go. There's demigods running around and the stakes are super high and there's all sorts of insane things happening. And looking at that, really gave me like a shot in the arm to go, why am I doing all this mundane stuff? No, let's go. Let's do this thing. Let's see how far we can go and how fast. Like, why does it have to be a slog? So yeah, look at these things that you admire if you're on board with this epic idea, right? And give yourself permission to get rid of your limits. 3 things that you need to build a scope like this, in my experience. The first thing is to actually decide that that's what you're going to do. Pick a North Star. Things are going to be epic in this campaign. This is going to be an epic high fantasy campaign. Because once you make that decision, it kind of like, it colors everything else. Every other decision you make, this idea filters down the way that you describe the world to the PCs, to the kinds of experiences they have, to the dreams they have, to the rumors they hear, to the legends of the world, to the history of it. The second thing is to steal. As I said before, you can lift direct set pieces and direct ideas and reuse things that other people have written. But I think the most important thing is for you to just use their works to understand that your limits are beyond where you think they are. The third and most valuable piece of advice that I can give is to use your ideas. Use them. Don't hoard them. When you have a great idea and you come up with wow, this is the coolest thing I've ever thought of, you will be faced with a choice. You have 2 paths. Either you will go, I'm never going to have an idea that cool again. I can't use it. I have to save it. I have to wait until it's special enough, until the moment is right. And what happens if you do that too much? It starts to become a bit of a habit. It's like the meme of the PCs who don't use the healing potion or the powerful magical item that they have. No matter how bad the situation becomes, because there might always be a tougher enemy further down the road, you do that with your ideas as well. You hold on to them and you hold on to them. And what ends up happening is that all those cool moments and ideas and amazing things that you thought of, the PCs don't see any of them. None of that stuff goes into your campaign, and the players are sitting there in this ongoing reality of waiting for the cool thing that never arrives. Whereas if you build yourself a mental model, which is, I've had this awesome idea, I'm going to find a way to put that into the campaign as soon as I possibly can while it makes a lick of sense to do so. I'm going to use that thing. Then what happens is that you have to come up with something else. You challenge your imagination, and then the more that you do this, the stronger it becomes. Do not think that because you use the cool thing, you're going to run out one day. That's not the way it works. You're training it like going to the gym. You're training your imagination. The more you use it, the better it becomes. Set a foundation, a work habit, if you like, that lets you iteratively build something very big and grand. So you've made this decision. You want your campaign to be epic. You've got a couple of cool ideas that you're ready to use. This cat's very distracting. Sorry about that, but he won't be told. So what happens then? How do you convey this stuff to your players? How do you set this vibe? As I said before, once you decide this, it kind of becomes a default setting for you when you're describing things like the dreams that your player characters have. It will influence the legends of the world. It will influence the history and all these sorts of things. That is how the scope gets conveyed to the players in terms of a world building aspect. But by far the most important thing is just let the players do cool things. Let them do cool things. Again, don't hoard, don't hold them back. Let them ride a dragon at level 3. Level them up quicker. What's going to happen? What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to get to level 10 faster? As far as I'm concerned, and I seem to be in the minority here, but let me know if you feel this too, the official pace of leveling that is given, at least in the 4th edition Dungeon Master's Guide, is insane to me. 10 encounters for one level. And I know that there's supposed to be a mix of combat and social and all the rest of it. You can't really do random encounters in 4th edition. The combat is very satisfying and deep and tactical, but it just takes too long to resolve, to just be fighting random goblins and owlbears or whatever that wander out of the forest. Your combats have to be significant in terms of you put stuff in there that matters, that fights that matter, they're set pieces that matter to the story and to the progression of the game. Having 8 to 10 of them for one level, and then what, you get one power or a feat or something very small, some tiny change to your character. To me, that seems like an incredible slog. It's such a grind, and it's really boring. So, if you ever have the misfortune of being in a group where I'm the DM, you're going to get power leveled. You're going to get all your cool stuff. You're going to get your toys. You're going to get your new powers. You're going to get go, 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 go. I want you to constantly be having new things, because I think that's way more exciting than this really slow, plotty kind of, only 5 more battles until I can get to level 3. Speed things up. Give people cool things. Now, right? Mechanically, give the players cool things. Story-wise, give the players cool things. Let them ride dragons. Let them survive an undead army besieging a city. Let them get fired over a wall in a catapult. Do all this mad stuff. Don't call for athletics checks to open doors, unless it's a really important door. Don't hold people back from cool things. Enable cool things. You should be the fun bringer as the DM. Yes, go ahead, do that thing. I can't wait to see how that plays out. That's awesome. Try to do your best to remove all of the blocks to fun that we somehow have weirdly internalized that are necessary parts of this game. We need to have encumbrance limits, and we need to pay for mundane expenses like sleeping at the inn. Don't get me started on D&D's economy. I have a whole separate video on why that thing is nonsense and you should throw it in the bin. But basically, like, they put all this work into making all these tables of, at least in older editions, of like how much hemp rope costs and a flask of oil, and how much it costs to have your armor repaired, and how much it costs to stay the night at the inn. And then they completely invalidate all of that by giving the players way more money than they would ever need to interact with those systems realistically ever again, which leaves you with a pointless and ridiculous bookkeeping exercise when you roll into town with 5,000 gold and the DM says, oh, it's going to cost you 4 copper to sleep at the inn. You better cross that off your character sheet. Why? Oh my God, get rid of it. These are barriers to fun, in my opinion. The other thing worth mentioning here, and this is a bit of a side quest. I have tangents. I've decided to embrace them. I will call them side quests. This is a side quest. If you can convey to the PCs, they have dreams about dragons the size of mountains fighting each other. They hear legends of ancient wars that raged for hundreds of years. You're continuing to drip feed this idea through to the players that the world is far bigger than the current sphere that they're occupying. That makes everyone feel out of their depth, makes them feel like underdogs, and it makes the world feel dangerous. If you want, I hear this a lot, people want their worlds to feel dangerous. If you want your world to feel dangerous, this is how. Rather than relying on this stupid notion of going like, the way you make the world feel dangerous is to kill PCs, is to just throw the dice and let the dice dictate what happens. PCs should be dying to random kobold encounters. No, that's nonsense. That just sucks from the player's point of view, that you roll a few dice badly and you play a character that you're invested in and you put time and effort into building and you had a whole hope for their future. That PC just dies. And they have to like roll up a new one, and the DM has to find a way to like explain why they joined the party. That's not how you make the world feel dangerous. I'm convinced you do that with the scope. Side quest over. The other thing that's important to mention is that this is all in hindsight, right? Like, I didn't sit down at the start of my campaign. I didn't have any of these thoughts when I began DMing. It came iteratively over 3 years of running this campaign, and gradually, as the campaign progresses, you're forced to answer more and more questions and come up with more and more things. And the accumulated state of that is something that I'm now looking back on. But if you're watching this and maybe you're a new DM and you're thinking that you have to have this incredible vision in order to proceed with your campaign, no, that's not it at all. You start and you just keep working at it. You keep working and working and building, but the main thing is to set this habit where you use your good ideas as soon as you can, and you give yourself permission to transcend your limits. Last thing to touch on is why. Why have this epic scope? So, the first and most fun reason, I think, is just because we can. To see exactly how far behind we can leave the mundane world and all of its nonsense, and see exactly how far our imaginations can take us. Turn everything up to 11 and see what that looks like. Just pure curiosity. The second thing is the general scaling and verisimilitude. Let's steal a word from Matt Colville. The general scaling of your campaign. If you pick a very humble scope, the entirety of this game is going to be concerned with this village and the surrounding lands. That's fine when the characters are level 1 or 2. When they're level 22, are they going to care what's going on in that village? No, of course not. They're going to be demigods by then. Even wars between mortal kingdoms of that planet are probably almost beneath them at that point. They need to be occupied with bigger things. Unless the village happens to be Tristram in Diablo and there's a portal to hell underneath it somehow. But by that stage, I'd say you've abandoned the idea of a humble scope. I don't think a lot of people try and do that, but you might be tempted to try and, this kind of slice of life type approach, which is very dependent on you being a very strong character and situational writer. People who have a lot of skills in that area can weave entertaining situations and problems out of very small mundane narrative elements. Personally, I don't think I can do that. I don't have that skill. I would rather have a great big exaggerated carnival of stuff to throw at the PCs in order to compensate for that lack of skill, right? If you're a new DM or you're not a super strong narrative genius, like most of us aren't, then you're probably going to be in the same boat. You need all the help you can get, and I would encourage you to give yourself that help. So intimately tied to that idea is the mechanical progression of your characters. having a very epic scope gives plenty of room for very big challenges that justify very high power levels in PCs. This is particularly a thing in 4th edition where levels 20 to 30 is called the epic tier for exactly the reason that it sounds. The characters have incredible levels of power, like out of control levels of power that don't scale with the content, with the monsters. That's a different problem. But you need to have a scope that justifies the use of these insane abilities and the discovery of powerful artifact level intelligent weapons and suits of armor that were made by gods and all these sorts of amazing things. You really need like massive problems to justify those sorts of things being at play. And if you don't scale your scope big enough, then it's going to feel a bit weird that these demigod level PCs are striding around dealing with problems that are effectively beneath them. It also lets, the players see the full extent. If they're into system mastery or they're interested in a particular character build that continues to evolve all the way up to the level cap, then it lets them explore all of that to the fullest extent. And that's certainly some kind of fun. Like there's all this negative stigma around min-maxing, but for all of it that it can be annoying, if it is done well and it is balanced alongside role-playing, which is perfectly possible, then those PCs deserve to see what the ultimate form of their character looks like. Tied intimately into that is the narrative progression and the character progression. So your player characters will develop and grow and change and become different people over the course of the campaign. And the way that happens is that they respond to things that happen to them inside of the storyline of the campaign. They change. Those sorts of things need time and space to occur. You can't just have a character change on a dime. If you've got a kind of an arc in mind where they start out a bitter anti-hero and they end up finding, the values of family or whatever, you can't just have that happen because 3 things happen to them. If the rest of all of this stuff needs time and room to scale, you're going to have that too to allow your characters' arcs to resolve and to really reach the end of that journey as well. And again, when they get to certain levels and they're basically demigods, you're going to have to come up with story reasons why they would need to, continue having their ideas challenged or validated depending on what's going on, whether they need to stick to their guns or change their minds, all these sorts of things. But what does that look like for a demigod, right? That's a super interesting question. I would argue any edition of D&D, any role-playing game that has this idea of progression, character levels, is going to have roughly this same set of problems as the PCs get close to the level cap. The next thing is that if you have a very exaggerated scope, then it's very easy to thrust PCs into urgent, interesting situations that kind of spur your players, give them an excuse to roleplay. Interpersonal stuff, role-playing between members of the party and that kind of stuff, tends to be a little bit more difficult and require a little bit more time for everyone to feel comfortable doing that. Whereas if everyone has a very big external stimulus to respond to, then it's a little bit more comfortable to start reacting to that in character. There's no downside. There's no risk of feeling stupid or if the other person misses your cue or whatever. There's no second side to it. If you can give them these very big attention-grabbing, show-stopping set pieces and events that are happening in the campaign, it's like kindling for the role-playing aspect of your table. And it promotes this cycle where the more that people role-play, they become more and more comfortable doing that so that they become better at doing that. And the better they do, the more comfortable they are, right? And this is a role-playing game at the end of the day. We are here to role-play. If you're on board with the idea of this epic narrative-based campaign, role-playing is going to be an intimate part of that. The next thing is that the players' plans and their responses to the challenges that you set forth as the DM will challenge you. So you say, hey, demon invasion. A portal has opened in the side of a mountain. Demons are spewing out of it, laying waste to the countryside around. What are you going to do? And the players come back to you and they say something like, this is terrible. We need to save the realm. We're going to recruit an army of dragons to help us fight the demons. Wow, that's an awesome idea. I love it. How am I going to make an army of dragons happen? Do you see? Their response to your challenge has challenged you in turn. Now you have to go and think of a way that can happen. And then when you do, you will give that to the players and they will come back with something again. The loot-based nature of D&D, this is one of the key things that separates it from other games and other experiences, in my opinion, because you can't go to the theater and start yelling stuff up at the stage and have the actors in the script change based on what you say. They'll just ask you to leave, But this, in D&D, that's what happens. You iteratively build this thing. Not only are you using your cool ideas and having to come up with stuff on your own, but you're using your cool ideas and then getting help from your players on what to do next because of their reaction and their character's reaction, which needs to be built into the next thing that you think up in order to involve them in the story. It's this multifaceted loop-based structure that I think is just so interesting. But fundamentally, like if you have a very epic scope and the players are coming back with, they get the idea that they're free to come up with epic solutions to your epic problems, then that will necessarily challenge and make you improve as a DM. I guess the final thing to mention, and I know this from personal experience, unfortunately, is that you don't know how long your group will be there. You might not have that much time with your group. You don't know when that experience will end. Surely you want to see how far you can take it together. Because if you don't, if you do those things that I was talking about earlier, where you hoard your ideas and you wait and you hold things back and you think that people need to somehow have this very restrained and measured approach so they don't level up very often and it's very hard to progress, your game might end sooner than you think it will. And then you definitely won't get a chance to do all those cool things that you thought you were going to do. You will regret that, I think. So that's why I say, put the pedal to the metal, abandon all sense of restraint, be unapologetically immature, and just embrace the highest of high fantasy nonsense that you can possibly conceive of, and be prepared to continue pushing that limit as the campaign evolves. And I think if you do that, you will have a campaign that is very fun and very, very memorable, and everybody will have a good time. So yeah, that's roughly my thoughts on scope, on the container for your campaign and why it should be epic. I hope that my lack of restraint was entertaining. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye. Cat.